Hi there, and welcome to the Dog Sports Decoded podcast. My name is Megan Ritchie, and I am the host. And with holidays coming up, I thought this was a great opportunity to talk about boarding your dog overnight. So if you're thinking you might be going away for the holidays, or would just prefer not to have your dog at home underfoot with visitors coming if that freaks them out, then this is a great opportunity to talk about boarding. So today we're going to talk about either boarding your dog at a facility or having some sort of pet sitter, whether that be they come to your home or you take your dog to their home. So that's what we're going to cover, and I've got 10 kind of questions that you can ask the facility or the sitter that you're talking to help determine if they are a good fit for you and your dog. So let's jump right in. So the first question I would ask is, what does a typical day look like? I kind of like to open with sort of this broader open-ended question. Let them sort of explain what your dog's day would look like with them, how often they're going to be fed, where they're going to stay. They really could go into a lot of different details here. If this is somewhere that you have already taken your dog before, like maybe you've done daycare at a certain facility and now you're just going to board overnight, or your dog walker normally takes them during the day and they're going to watch them while you're on holidays. This might look a little bit different, but just kind of a broad open-ended question just to kind of open the lines of communication, get a feel for the facility, the people you're talking to, and just sort of open up the communication. So I kind of like this more broad question to start. And often that can just kind of give you a vibe whether or not it's going to work for your dog. So the next question I would ask is, what is the staff to dog ratio? And this is going to be different, of course, depending on who you're talking to. So if it is a more formal boarding kennel type situation, this might be how many dogs do they have on site, how many staff members oversee all those dogs. So if there's 100 dogs on site and they only have one staff member, that might not be great. One staff member might be fine overnight, but is one staff member going to be able to clean all those pens, takes dogs in and out to different play groups, feed all the dogs, water all the dogs? Maybe not. So that's a good question to ask. Is a staff member on site overnight or around 24/7? Also a good question to ask as part of that. And then more specifically for dogs that are going to be involved in play groups, how many dogs are in a play group? What's the staff to dog ratio again? Is one staff member overseeing 25 dogs in a play group, or is it more like 1 to 5? So just how many staff members are there to observe that play, make sure no dogs are getting picked on or having kind of any stress issues in that group, to make sure everybody's getting along. And a good part of that would also be to ask kind of what that staff member's experience is like. Are they, brand new to the facility? Have they been trained in some way? How do they know what they're looking for as to whether or not dogs are getting along or not? So it's all kind of plays together. And then if you are looking at sort of more of a stay-at-home option, if the pet sitter is coming to your home, how many homes would they see in a day? So if one pet sitter is seeing, say, 5 dogs or 5 different homes in a day, that might be reasonable. If they're trying to get to 30 homes in a day, probably not. So just ask how many homes they're visiting. If your dog will be at their home, how many dogs do they take in? How many dogs do they have that are their own? And how many boarding dogs do they take in at the same time? So if they have 3 dogs and they take in another 5 dogs, or do they take in 30 dogs at their house? Just sort of what is the staff to dog ratio there. And then on to question number 3, how often will your dog be fed, watered, and pottied? So again, if this is a boarding type facility, will the dog be in a run? Will they have constant access to the outside? What time of day are they fed? How often are they fed? Do they have constant access to clean water? And that sort of thing. So just what's sort of the general day-to-day care and well-being checks that will happen with your dog. Again, if this is somebody coming to your house, are they coming once or twice a day? How often do they feed? Again, are they taking the dog out every time? Sort of the same sort of questions you'll want to ask. So then question number 4, how much exercise time will your dog get? And what kind of exercise will they get? So if this is someone coming to your house, do they come and take your dog out for a 1-hour walk every day? Do they go play ball in the backyard? How long is the dog out for? Is it just a quick potty break, out for 10 minutes? And this doesn't even have to be exercise time per se, but maybe attention time. So if you have a senior dog, do they stay and do couch cuddles for an hour? Are they at home all day with your dog? Just sort of those sort of questions. How much interactive time is your dog going to get? So is this, big play time? They're in with 25 dogs for 8 hours a day, and then they rest, in a kennel at night. What does that sort of look like? And same thing sort of on the boarding side. So as I mentioned, if they are in a big play group, do they get out all day and they play with the dogs, or are they out for an hour, then they get a break, then they're out for half an hour, and then they get a break? Because typically you would want your dog to get some sort of break, especially from a big play group. Often they can get kind of over aroused if they're in with a big group all the time, and especially if they're not used to that. So those are important questions to ask. Again, if you're part of a regular daycare and they do overnight care as well, you probably already have a good idea if your dog does well in that environment. But just make sure that matches your expectations. And if your dog does need more exercise time or a little bit more attention, is that something that they can accommodate, or can you pay extra for that? So maybe a half-hour walk is included every day, but you can pay for an extra half hour if you'd like. So just try and get those questions answered. And then the number 5 question is, where will your dog stay, and can you go see it? So again, really depends on the situation you're looking at, but if it's a boarding kennel, are they in runs? Are the dogs visually separated? Or are they just in chain link runs? Are they housed together 24/7? If it's at somebody else's house, do they have their own kind of area closed off? Does your dog just stay out with their dogs? Does everybody have their own kennel? And if they're coming to your house, you'll obviously be very familiar with where they stay. But if the person's staying there overnight, do they need to know certain rules, like the dog's not allowed in a certain room, or isn't allowed to sleep on the bed? Will the sitter kind of watch out for that as well? So those are questions to ask. If your dog is going off-site, isn't staying at your home, can you do a tour of the sitter's home? Make sure it's going to work for you. There aren't kind of obvious dangers, something like that, or you don't like what you see as far as the other dogs in their home maybe not getting along, or boarding dogs not getting along. Or if you are taking your dog to a kennel or overnight sort of facility, can you see the run that your dog might stay in? What do the runs look like? Are they clean? All that sort of stuff. So just where do the dogs stay? So that brings us to question number 6. So what is their procedure if your dog gets injured? So often you'll have to sign waivers, no matter who's taking care of your pet, that sort of dictates what their procedure is. But if they don't, it's definitely something you would like to ask about. So if your dog has a minor injury, sort of what's going to happen? Do they monitor it themselves? Do they try and doctor it themselves? At what point will they call you? So if it's something more serious, or do they just call you no matter what? If your dog has medical issues that you've told them about, will they call you right away if they start to exhibit symptoms? And heaven forbid, if something worse happens, what veterinarian do they take it to? Do they require any of your dog insurance information? That sort of thing. So they should probably ask what your medical guidelines would be to them, like if there's a limit, you don't want to spend over a certain amount if your dog gets injured, or you have I actually had an emergency vet the other day ask if I had do not resuscitate preferences. For my dog, he was just going in for an ear infection, but the emergency vet did ask about that. So if there's anything like that that you want to have them make note of, or they might ask you about, but what is their procedure? Do they have, especially if it's a house sitter, if they're coming to your house, maybe it's a teenage neighbor, do they actually have the means to take your dog to the veterinarian if they need to? So if your dog gets into, chemical house cleaners or something like that, do they actually have a car that they could take your dog to the vet? Or do they know who your regular vet is? How would payment be handled? All those sorts of questions. So, your 14-year-old neighbor that's running over to feed your dog probably doesn't have a visa that they can apply the charges to for any medical treatment. So kind of what's your plan ahead of time for that, and or how does your pet sitter or boarding facility arrange all of that? So good questions to ask and find out ahead of time. Hopefully never needed, but better to contemplate ahead of time. So that takes us to number 7, which is what sort of updates can you expect to receive? Do they give you any reports? Do you get daily pictures? I know some dog walkers and things like that will give, daily sort of progress reports. They'll send you pictures every day, what they did, how your dog's doing. The boarding kennel I take my guys to, they have a little report card I get at the end of the day, and there's certain things that they check off every day, making sure your dog's eating, not losing weight, and check for a whole number of other just health concerns that might pop up while your dog's stressed and you're away. So do they do any sort of updates like that? Some boarding facilities now have live video that you can watch 24/7. So just sort of what kind of updates can they provide to you? Can you call in if you're concerned, or just want to chat and kind of reassure yourself that your dogs are doing okay. So just try and establish what their expectations are ahead of time, so that your expectations are aligned with their expectations. So then this number 8 is group play allowed, is kind of a big one. It covers a whole host of things, and this could be likely not at your house, but it might be a pet sitter that takes your dog into their home. So is group play allowed? So at this point, I would assume that if your dog is in sort of that group play or multi-dog environment, they're already kind of comfortable in general being around other dogs, and maybe dogs they don't know as well. But if it's sort of a blended dog group, dogs your dog doesn't know, a few different questions to ask. So first of all, are big and little dogs allowed to play together? Typically the bigger, the more dogs in the group, the less good that outcome is. Some big dogs and little dogs do get along well, and often it's not even necessarily fights, just big clumsy dogs bumping into little dogs can cause injury or just scare them. So that's something to be aware of. But yeah, just how do they play together? And is that a concern for you? So just more questions to ask. And the next one would be, how big are the play groups? And those kind of play hand in hand. If it's a play group of 3 dogs and they all get along, it probably doesn't matter if they're big and little dogs too much. But again, if you get a big play group with 25 dogs, big and little dogs together, probably not a great mix. But just questions to ask and kind of gauge your own comfort level there. I know my dog Tess, when she was younger, we took her to a daycare group that had, I'm not even sure how many staff members they had watching the dogs, but I think 2 or 3 for this group. But, they probably had 25 to 30 dogs, and she just got totally overwhelmed in that group. So that didn't work out for her. But Riggs, at the new location we're going to, he is in a group probably with about 2 or 3 dogs, and one staff member watching him, and he loves it, absolutely loves it. So really depends on the dog, depends on the facility, how good the staff members are at picking dogs that are compatible to play together. You don't want a super shy dog playing with a over-the-top you know, pestery dog that's, you know, poking at him every 10 seconds, play with me, play with me, play with me. But on the other hand, sometimes just a really confident dog, quiet dog, can bring out some confidence in a more shy dog. So, you know, good question to ask, how are the play groups made? And, you know, what do the staff members look for to find a compatible playmate? And again, just how many dogs are in that group. So then the last question you might want to ask is, do they keep track of fight incidents? And this might be tracked in a whole number of ways, but somehow you would want them to indicate that they do keep track of these numbers, and obviously the lower the number of fights, the better. And again, fighting doesn't necessarily mean causing injury, just any sort of, I won't even say aggressive, but non-friendly fighting. You know, you might see dogs roughhousing and scruffing and things like that, but they're still playing and both dogs are having fun. But not fun fighting, I guess, not play fighting. So do they keep track of that? So like I said, that could be any number of ways to track it. So it could be the number of fights per day. It could be some sort of ratio. So maybe they have, you know, if they have 200 dogs pass through their facility, let's say in a week, and their number of fights per week is maybe one fight per 200 dogs. So that might be reasonable. I'm not sure what would be an acceptable number, but just to have them tell you that in some way they do track it, and it should be a low number. You know, I think there should be warning flags going up in your head if it's multiple fights, you know, through multiple play groups every day. It's probably not something you want your dog involved in. So just, do they keep track of it? And what steps do they take to sort of prevent those incidents? And how are staff trained to break up those incidents? So often they'll have sort of block boards that they can put, just kind of plywood boards or plastic boards between the two dogs if they are fighting, so they can't visually see each other, and that allows the staff to step in and kind of break up the fight without getting injured themselves. So what kind of training do the staff have to step in as well is also a good question to ask. All right, so moving on here, we're all the way down to number 9. So an important question is, how early do you have to book? Especially important, I've found, over Christmas holidays, but Easter, summertime, any sort of spring break type holidays, a lot of boarding kennels and pet sitters fill up really quickly, and especially the good ones. So like for a pet sitter, like a good pet sitter, not uncommon to have to book at least a year in advance. So you know, if you're booking for Christmas holidays 3 days before you go on your trip, you're probably not going to find a great pet sitter, just because they fill up quickly and early. So how far in advance typically do you have to book? I know normally for Christmas holidays at the kennel I go to, I try to book by the end of September, just to give you sort of an idea. So not that they're necessarily full at that point, but if I want to make sure I get my dogs in, I definitely try and get it in kind of by the end of September, because they are filling up for sure. So how far in advance do you have to book? You know, you probably are not going to get a guarantee, but just something to give you an idea. So if you are booking a trip in advance, you want to fly somewhere, you're kind of booking your flights, I would be asking a good boarding facility or pet sitter, you know, when you need to book, and let them know. Lastly, what does it cost? It can be, I've seen a wide variety of different charges for pet sitting versus boarding. I would say often boarding is less expensive, with the big caveat that it depends on how many dogs you have. So I've certainly got friends that have you know, 3 or more dogs, and at that point it can be cheaper to bring a pet sitter into your house than it can be to board multiple dogs in separate runs. So just what does it cost to you to have your dog stay? Important to know. Of course, there's often extra charges, so other things you can ask about is, are there other fees associated. So if your dog has a special diet or they're on medication, are there fees associated with doing that? So if they have to come to your house 3 times a day to give medication at specific times, there's probably going to be extra fees. I know in my case, my guys are getting raw food, and so there's a special fee associated with that because they have to keep freezers, and you know, it just takes longer to feed them and clean dishes and things like that. So are there any special fees associated with that? Again, if you're having a house sitter come in, is there an extra fee for watering plants, bringing in the mail, anything like that? You would like to know that probably ahead of time, just so there's no you know, upset feelings when you come back on your trip and you find there's extra charges you weren't expecting. And then, you know, lastly, there might be some other special services. So again, at the kennel I go to, they offer grooming, nail trims, things like that. There are special fees associated with that, of course. They also have sort of boredom busting games that your dog can do, so you can pay a little bit extra and they might do agility or some nose work or something with them. So I think while all dogs would enjoy getting out a little bit more and a little more one-on-one attention, you know, especially if your dog maybe isn't as active or can't do sort of that group play. You know, sometimes any of those sort of games, just to get them out and thinking and having a little bit more fun while you're away, is a great addition to sort of those kennel services. And some will do sort of more of a board and train sort of option, but some will do training as well. So whether that be for fun or for a specific goal you're trying to do, some facilities or pet sitters might offer training as well. So there might be fees associated with that, but that can be a godsend too sometimes if you're looking for, you know, something above and beyond sort of what would normally be expected at a boarding facility or from a pet sitter. So if you want to come home to a nice smelling, perfectly groomed, clean dog after they've been wrestling in the mud with their friends for a week, you know, paying for an extra grooming session might be well worth it versus coming home and having to face the wet, soggy dog yourself. So just asking about any of those extra fees or services sometimes is a big benefit. So I hope that helps you if you are considering boarding your dog over the holidays and haven't been too sure what to look for in a boarding facility or in a pet sitter. Always helps to ask for recommendations from friends or family members, dog trainers, veterinarians, and I would always recommend going and seeing it for yourself. Again, talking to the owner or the staff, and just make sure you're comfortable leaving your dog there. I think we've all seen horror stories of pet sitters or boarding kennels, so just make sure you're comfortable with all the answers that you get, and you know, feel comfortable leaving your dog, obviously, for that length of stay. So I hope that gives you some comfort and a few different questions you can ask to kind of get the ball rolling. I think sometimes we just need those icebreakers, and you know, if you're brand new to dogs, maybe you've just got a dog this year and aren't really too sure what to look for in a boarding facility to know if they're sort of up to snuff. I hope this just alleviates some of your concerns and helps you find the perfect place to board your dog so that you can enjoy your holiday and your dog can as well. So with that, I will sign off and I will talk to you guys again next week.